Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is founder and director of the Cosmometry Project, board member of the Resonance Science Foundation, and president from 2006 to 2019, and adjunct faculty of RSF's Resonance Academy. He was the associate producer of Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? And visual effects coordinator of Thrive 2, to be released in 2020. He was former co-director of the Foundation for Conscious Evolution and a lifetime member of the Buckminster Fuller Institute and Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. He is the author of the brand new book, Cosmometry, Exploring the Holofractal Nature of the Cosmos. Welcome to the show, Marshall Lefferts.
Thank you, Matt. Awesome to be here with you. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while, having met you in Egypt a couple of years ago. Had a great time there with the Resonance delegate trip we took.
Yeah, man, it's been a while. You've been doing some amazing work, and I was lucky to get a preview of your book that launched today, man. Massive, massive congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm super excited to finally get it out there. 40 years in the making, and most people don't even know what's been going on inside this head. So now I can actually put it out there. So it feels really good.
Yeah, man.
It's celebrating with you today.
Oh, dude. Yeah. I'm so privileged to be the first one talking to you because you sent me the book and I'm going through it and you're sharing some of the chapters to have a look because I only had about, 5 days to take a peek. And I'm going through these chapters and I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, like each chapter in itself is just something that opens up like a rabbit hole that I'm just so curious about, and the way that you're connecting the dots and the way that you're viewing the world and shaping this and sharing the material is really amazing. So why don't we just begin with a little bit about who you are, how you started writing this book, your research, and some of the things that were in it, because we can explore so many different directions. Sure.
That sounds great. Well, as you mentioned, I am involved with the Resonance Science Foundation, which is Nassim Haramein's organization. So I've known Nassim for close to 20 years now and have been mostly vicariously learning his unified physics because I'm not a physicist, but I get to hang out with him and the researchers and get exposed to a lot of those ideas. So I've learned a lot. And but prior to meeting Nassim, back actually in the late 1970s, I actually had this kind of frying pan over the head waking up experience in my first year of college that just popped me in a different state of consciousness. And it didn't solve all my problems, but it made me realize there was something bigger going on in the world. And shortly after that, I actually got two very seminal things happen. First one was I studied Aikido, which you're probably familiar with because you're very much into the athleticism and the Zen of the Zen athlete approach. And Aikido for me is like embodies that kind of principle. And so it was really great exposure to the embodiment of what has become some of the core knowledge and information that's in my book around the torus and that flow dynamic that exists throughout the universe. And the second thing was coming upon the writings of Buckminster Fuller. He's the man that invented the geodesic dome and was really one of the most seminal thinkers of the 20th century in regards to, well, how to make the humanity be a success on the planet by what he called a comprehensive design revolution rather than any kind of other kind of conflict resolution or, through conflict revolution. But very importantly for what's in my book, he was studying what he called nature's coordinate system. And he wrote these incredible books called Synergetics that are a very, very deep dive into his discoveries around the geometry that you can find in nature and throughout the cosmos. And so his work became very foundational for me, and some of the core aspects of what he was writing about became really guiding principles and understanding for my quest over these 40 years. And when I met Nassim 20 years ago, in his presentation about his physics, he was referring to Buckminster Fuller's work and this whole toroidal pattern. that had become something I had become aware of through my embodiment and practices with the Joe staff, which I still do to this day, because it's just a beautiful way to experience these dynamic energies. And so when I saw his presentation, I didn't know a lot about physics, but I just knew that he was probably right because of what he was basing his model on, and it was different from anything else I'd heard about physics prior to that. And so now, after these almost 20 years, and Nassim's work is just so groundbreaking and really seems to be solving the major problems in physics at this time. So it's the work of Buckminster Fuller and the work of Nassim, and I'm a musician. I've been a musician my whole life, so understanding the system of music, enough of training in music theory to understand that system, I came to realize that the cosmic geometry, the unified physics, and music are all describing one unified system in a very beautiful, simple, and elegant way. And so that's the essence of what cosmometry is and what it's about in the book. And the other component is consciousness, which I know is a big part of your interest in how does this all relate to us. And so that's another key aspect of what's in my book as well.
That's amazing, man. I'm so excited to dive in even deeper because, like I said, I've had a preview of these chapters, and just each one inspires so much curiosity and imagination. And very rarely am I so excited about a book when I'm shared with it and how well-rounded this is. So what I wanted to talk about, you shared on it a little bit. You said there's 3 lenses in which this book is like kind of created or seen from, or how you got that information. So why don't we start there? Because you touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so first of all, this word cosmometry is not a familiar word for most people. Generally, this field of knowledge is referred to as sacred geometry, and I feel like that's a very important aspect of this, what's really a larger field of knowledge. And so I, many years ago, was looking for what could be another name for this field, and I was thinking about how it's not just geometry, earth-based, geo meaning earth, but it's cosmic, it's cosmometry, and this word cosmometry came into my mind. And I thought it was kind of funny sounding and yet interesting. And when I did a web search on it, I found that it's been in the English language for a few hundred years, but it's not in use. It's never been popularized. And it was interesting because there were 2 scientific papers that referenced it, and then there were 6 entries from channel writings from masters of the Syrian star system. So, and they apparently really get this cosmometry is very important. So the way I define it is that it's the study of fundamental patterns, structures, systems, and processes that we can find that are informing, literally bringing into form the universe and ourselves and our world as we experience it. And myself and many others, going with Buckminster Fuller and David Bohm and Nassim and Foster Gamble, who I work with, and many others, are discerning what these patterns are. And so it's kind of a mapping out in relationship to the geometry. And so then you ask me about these 3 lenses that are the way that I'm going into this topic as a whole. And so the three lenses are the cosmic geometry, which are the patterns we can see in nature, and the ones we can conceptualize as being there based on some of what Buckminster Fuller was writing about, and the torus flow dynamics. These are all the kind of the physical and pattern and geometric relationship aspects that we can discern. And then the second lens is the unified physics model, which is based on Nassim's unified physics that I've been studying for a long time. And it's based on the same understanding of the geometry that came from Bucky Fuller and beyond. And then the third component, the third lens, is music. And music is a system of harmonic relationships that we're familiar with. We're familiar with what music is in our daily experience. And the most significant an important thing to realize about music, even though we kind of take it for granted, like, oh yeah, music, is that we didn't invent music, we discovered it. It's a system of vibratory relationships that exists in the universe, whether we had ears to hear it or not. And it's not just sound vibrations as we experience, but it's sound and light. They're both the same vibratory systems, and they're actually can convert from one to the other very readily. And so this system of harmonic relationships of music is what is organizing. It's like I call it the master code. It's like what's organizing the way the universe is coming into its harmonic relationships at all scales. And there are many examples of how that is understood in physics and in the patterns in nature, and et cetera. So those are the three lenses through which I have viewed what cosmometry is in this book.
Awesome, man. Well, it reminds me of having Eric Rankin on the show. And one of the things that I found interesting and feel personally is that music is a very powerful way for understanding the universe. And it has a lot of relation to mathematics, to patterns, to geometry, to all of those different things. So I find a musical IQ individual has a very firm grasp on reality, and they seem to be, not always obviously, but they seem to have a very balanced way of life. They're more zen, if you will, and the way that they think and the way they perceive and the way that they problem solve through the power of music. And I think it's a very important understanding. And I'm sure you're aware of Eric Rankin's work and some of the things that he's discovered through music and those vibrational patterns that otherwise
Absolutely.
People wouldn't have that viewpoint, because a lot of the time, if you're really good at math or science, you don't have the creative. Not always, but it's not as common. And a lot of time, if you're musical, sometimes you don't have the physics side or whatever. So to combine the two and combine those viewpoints with the work of David Bohm and Buckminster Fuller is very powerful.
No, it's absolutely right. And I do know Eric's work. As a matter of fact, I actually snuck in another interview with him and Michelle last night.
Nice.
So that was really fun. That was the first time we had a chance to talk, and he was really thrilled about what's in my book as well. And of course, his work has just helped so much to get the whole idea of this correlation of music to the geometry out in the world. And yeah, I agree with you. Being a musician all my life, and there's many studies about what music does to brain states and the growing of neurons in our brains and things like that. And I really feel it's because, this harmonic system is inherent in the universe. And a lot of what I am writing about the musical aspect comes in reference to the work of a man named Richard Merrick. I don't know if you've heard of Richard Merrick. He wrote an amazing book called Interference. I think it's called A Grand Musical Scientific Theory. Big fat book, pretty intense in some of its technical side, but also conceptually just amazing. I learned so much from reading his book and incorporated a number of ideas into what I was writing. And one of the most significant is that the reason that our physiology is designed the way it is not to make it convenient to hear music or sound, but because that is the actual geometric shape of sound. In the universe, it's a spiraling, algorithmic, vibratory, set of frequencies. And so the most natural thing to organize the physiology in each of us would be to come into that form that is already present, basically in space, you could say. And we emerge from the nothingness into form. And as we do, the most natural thing is to actually take on those exact kinds of spiraling shapes and those harmonic proportions. And they're actually found in different ways in our body. But, so as a musician, I really feel that when we experience directly music, we're engaging in a direct relationship with something that's actually happening in the universe, in space, beyond us and through everything. And that's true with people who just listen to music or are dancers. it's still the same thing. I do know that people who play music, there are these studies that, like you said, it kind of opens up maybe different doors of perception, or however you might say it. But I think it's a significant aspect of what you're talking about.
Well, when you said that, what it brought up for me was like fields. I never thought, the way that you shared it, I never thought about it like that, like the music creating like a field and just literally generating that. Because when you go to Burning Man, or you go to a festival, or even a different bar or pub or whatever, if you go look at an orchestra, or you go look at rock music or heavy metal versus jazz, they create different fields. And you can also tell when one's in harmony and when it's out of harmony. And then that we can add on to that pretty much forever. And in your book, it really dives into deep topics. Right now, you're talking a little bit, more on the music front. And just to let people know, like the chapter 6, Music, the Master Code, you have the holographic symphony, music basics, harmonic symmetry. There's so much in this. And then you start the book with wholeness, holographic wholeness, fractal wholeness, synergistic wholeness, and more. This is just covering the basis. And, ultimately you get to the next octave. And this is where we talked a little bit before the show, which I find fascinating because there's so much interesting information out there. And there's a lot of fluff. There's a lot of stuff that is just, it sounds good and it could be true. We don't know, but there's a lot of fluff. And the way that you've kind of shared in the next octave, how it might be potentially possible, and you can speak on this, but the way that I kind of view it is a more cohesive reality, something better, something more harmonic for the individual and the collective in a more grounded way. So I don't know if we want to start there because it's a deep topic.
Let's do.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's like the big picture right there. And it's for me, and why I wrote that is it's what makes everything that preceded that in the book have a sense of relevance to our experience here on Earth, and how this can actually literally help us to make this transition we're in on this planet. We all know we're feeling the turbulence of the world pretty strongly in many fronts, in the social fronts and political and in environmental, ecological, pretty much every front really. And so the idea of this section of the book called the Next the Next Octave, is that there is from a musical perspective, when you have two notes that are like the same, like a C note, one octave and then a higher octave, and then you take the lower one and you slowly bring it up closer to the higher one to come into unison with that, where it's the same frequency. Right before that happens, you get this intense turbulence, musical vibratory turbulence, and you can hear it, you can feel it. It's very unsettling. And that, to me, is what we're experiencing here on the planet in our collective field. And I think it's actually a literal vibrational shift that we're at the threshold of coming into right before we reach what would be the next octave of unison in a harmonic, resonant experience as human beings living on this planet. And we're in that extreme turbulence time. And so that's kind of a symptomatic way of looking at what's happening from a musical perspective. But what's important about the idea of this next octave is that we have the opportunity, through understanding what I have in my book, through understanding Nassim's physics, through understanding applications of the 0-point field, the unified field in health, using frequency-based medicine. That is, it's available. It's coming out soon. In certain ways, it's happening. I'm sure you're aware of some of that. In generating energy from the field, in environmental restoration through basically reconnecting with the original quantum blueprint that's in water, for example. It's there. It's just that we've distorted it in ways. So if we can restore that, these are all possible. I'm exposed to a lot of interesting technologies and modalities that a number of which are not out in the world yet, but nonetheless, they are very real and they do work. And, as I'm sure you're aware, there are certain powers in the world that don't want these kinds of shifts quite yet. I think it's inevitable. But so the idea of the next octave is when humanity makes that shift, we will be able to harmonize ourselves with nature and the cosmos again, which is already in harmony with itself. We're just, we're wobbling pretty badly. And yet we have this opportunity with the capacities we have, like you said, very grounded, not fluff, idealism, which is good to hold. It's actually really good to hold the ideal in mind because it helps to set the clear intention, but then to actually ground it in the applications and capacities we have to make it real. And it's very close at hand. That's the good news, and it's hopefully just in time because we're on the edge, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, man. Well, you touched on a lot of great points there, and I kind of want to just open up a whole bag of worms with that because, you worked on Thrive documentary of both of them, and I invite anyone who has not seen that to check out the documentary. And as I understand it, the second one was about looking at what technologies exist now or where are we at with science and our understanding of physics to create solutions for these massive problems that we are aware of. First, you got to identify there's a problem, and then you can create a solution. And you speak about in the introduction about passing the big test on the planet. And I don't know if that idea came from Buckminster Fuller.
It did.
But I like the way that you talk about the octaves in this incoherence, if you will, as we come together. And I've heard that from many different ways, mostly fluff, but it looks also from just observing the planet. You're like, this is crazy. Like, what is going on here? And I just like to think about peace and cooperation and what's possible if we, I'll do like hashtag Team Earth. Like, what if we cooperated? The scientists, the physics, the people, everybody just got together, figured out the biggest problems, and we put our heads together. We moved money to a side. We try to figure it out, but we need to survive. It's such a competitive world. So it's hard to, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you don't have food, water, shelter, it's real hard to be great in your community because you're worried about how to get a sandwich, how to give your kids a sandwich, how to get the Nike cleats and all this type of stuff. So yeah, maybe you can speak on that a little bit. There's more, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And you were mentioning Thrive, and the first Thrive one, which was called Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? Came out in 2011, and if anybody hasn't seen that, they can go to thrivemovement.com and watch it for free. It's in 27 languages. It has over 86 million documented views now. And it's a very powerful kind of expose of some of what's in my book, the fundamental pattern and geometry and understanding how that informs new technologies, and then looking at the challenges we have with the systems that are inhibiting these things to happen in the world. They're actually causing a lot of disruption. And then the way we can approach solutions in the long run based on understanding these harmonic models. So Thrive, that's a nutshell of what Thrive 1 covers. It covers a tremendous amount beyond that. Thrive 2 is in the works right now. And like you were saying, basically after Thrive 1 came out, Foster and Kimberly Gamble, who are the filmmakers, they were contacted from people around the world, and with different kinds of inventions and discoveries, and some of which are just ideas, but they had like 1,000 different possible interesting new developments and innovations that they ultimately got a team and did some vetting and found a number that were actually very real and very much ready to be brought into application, and all of which are based upon an understanding that there is a unified field. We understand, we've all sensed it in our spiritual traditions and we speak of it. But when it comes to science, for a few hundred years, it's been very materially oriented, and between the material is empty space, and there isn't a connection between things. And the past 100 years, we've had the quantum revolution, which has been saying, well, wait a minute, things are entangled. These atoms are entangled and photons are entangled, and there's experimental proof of that now. But more significantly now, we're understanding the geometry and the physics of the unified field, and that is enabling us to really be able to make the kinds of shifts that are needed in the world. To actually to again ground it into a practical reality, and to enable us to stabilize this highly turbulent situation, and to do so in ways that are liberating for people. For instance, like you were saying, people in Maslow's hierarchy who don't have these kinds of needs fulfilled at a very basic survival level can't really be open so easily to the kinds of higher level, collaboration and creativity and innovation that people like you and I are more able to participate in. And the beautiful thing about a lot of these new technologies is they are capable of empowering those people to find that basic level of sustenance, of survival, of thriving actually at the fundamental levels, and to do so without having to have a large overhead of kind of infrastructure put in place to supply that. So it's low impact on the environment and high impact on those people's lives, both in terms of energy generation and health and well-being, and also like water purification and all that, environmental restoration. So it's actually really super exciting, and Thrive 2, it will be a presentation around what is this field, and we've got some awesome visual effects that I'm helping to co-direct with Foster about that, and then what are these innovations, some of them, just a few, that are really all tapping the same understanding that the universe is based on the frequency, the vibration, and resonance. So whether it's in health technologies or energy, environmental restoration, all through understanding the vibratory aspect and the ability to restore it into harmonic structure. Amazing things happen when you do that. Not surprisingly.
Yeah, man. There's so much there. And what I always think about is just the advancement of technology and how it's exponentially growing. If you look at the leaps from, let's say, 1000 to 1100, or like the 1800s to the 1900s, 1900s to 2000, but you look at 2000 to 2020, like how it's exponentially growing so fast, the leaps that we're experiencing, we can't even keep up. So if we can move our momentum, our intention, our dollars towards using that science for global good, for global change, I think that it is very possible to make groundbreaking discoveries in pretty much every area of science, of health, of wellness, of cleaning up the water, of giving everybody the basic needs, food, water, shelter. And I was always curious when I was younger, like when I started kind of down the rabbit hole of looking at the world and all the insane problems, I was like, how do we still have war? And why am I sitting here and like, we can't feed Africa rice because I see these starving kids on my TV every day. I was like, rice cannot be that much. There's so many multimillionaires. What is actually going on? And then I learned about organizational systems structures, and who knows what the hell's going on there, but something is impeding this, and it's not ideal. And we need to come together to, look at these problems and solve them, not wait for a government or an organization or anything outside of the global community to align and figure this out together. And we could have some incredible technologies and tools to support us, but it's going to take people together. And the one thing that I really like at the beginning of the book you touch on is our worldview. And you talk a little bit about how we have our own perception. I think that's so brilliant and important, because me growing up in Canada, I'm going to be playing hockey and cheering for this team or whatever. This is a stupid example, but in the States, you might be playing football, cheering for that team. And it's just how we identify, right? If you're in the South, you'll probably be a Christian. If you're, in the Middle East, you're probably a Muslim, not always. But your environment, from what you experience directly, that's going to be your truth, then you're going to seek understanding. But the way that you weave in culture and the worldview and how that influences us and how it influences our consciousness and our choices, I think is a very important point to make right at the beginning of the book. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is really key, our worldview. It defines our beliefs, our behaviors, our choices. And we have a personal worldview, which is, I'm me, and this is the way I think and how I believe and how I act and the choices I make. And then we have a shared worldview, which is cultural in great degree. It's education, the education we have, our spiritual, religious beliefs and institutions and how they inform our beliefs, our personal beliefs. And so we have, the worldview is actually just fundamental to how we look at the world, ourselves, and just the universe as a whole. And so what I'm writing about in the beginning of my book there is that it's a key aspect to making the shift that we're in now on the planet, to really actually take a look at what is our worldview. And our worldview has been very much informed, as I said before, by a materialist-based scientific model that got put in place a few hundred years ago, and has really perpetuated the idea of this separation and scarcity, because when you just look at the material side of things and the earth as a limited resource, it can look pretty darn scarce and limited. And that's been dominating then the way culture has formed. And the scientific model has very much supported that. And so what we're at the threshold of now is a shift in the scientific worldview. And as we talk about in the Resonance Academy delegate program, which is to study the unified physics, it's a shift from a worldview of separation and disconnection that has been in science to one of unity and connection, and from a very scientific perspective. And the science that Nassim and his researchers are doing, and many other scientists around the world and researchers, is really making it very obvious, if it weren't already, and it's really obvious now, that everything in the universe is connected, and we're actually immersed in a sea of energy. And that, in fact, the foundation of our experiential reality is superabundance. It's not scarcity at all. It's superabundance. Just one example I love, it blew me away when I learned this, is the proton, which is the little whirlwind of energy that's spinning at near the speed of light inside at the center in the nucleus of atoms, are the little protons. And they are not known to decay, where other particles in particle physics have a decay period, and atomic structures have a half-life, it's called. And the protons, I was researching this, and the current estimated half-life of a proton is 4 times the age of the universe. So the thing that makes up our physical reality across the entire universe does not decay. As a matter of fact, it's eternal, basically, as far as we can tell. Which means that the very foundation of our physical universe, and it's an energetic universe, is superabundant. And so where is the proton getting that energy from to spin endlessly like that? And that's the underlying field, this unified field, what Nassim calls the Planck field. And I won't go too much into the technical side of that at the moment, but the point is that when you understand that's the true nature of the foundation of our universe, it's superabundant, and that we're now developing technologies that can access that in all these different ways I described before, that changes our worldview fundamentally. And for example, as soon as we have unlimited clean, free energy technology, the whole concept of an economy and an economic system gets fundamentally changed, because our current systems are based on scarcity and limitation. And when you reverse the equation, what does it mean then? So it's a huge shift in our worldview, and it goes beyond culture at this point. It goes into more of a universal understanding. And that's part of what I feel is happening in the human collective consciousness in our worldview, is we're transcending some of those more localized cultural and personal beliefs and worldviews into a more cosmic and unified understanding.
Yeah, definitely. You touched on a lot of important points there. Even the economic structure, it's the most fundamental. I've definitely gone down some deep rabbit holes of just like, where does money come from? And, there's a lot of great documentaries. I touch on it a little bit on Thrive. Just look at the paper receipt for the silver note. Just even there, you used to exchange gold for the paper receipt. That's your receipt. Now we're using it as money. Then it goes into all this craziness. And the challenge is that these organizations or institutions or whatever you want to call them, they hold a great deal of power, because that's how we're trading in the world right now. And so for that worldview to change, to have free energy, which we should be able to figure out, I think, or at least a better alternative. Just one stupid example is like the tolls. And I think it's in Maine or in other places, I'm sure they've done this, but the toll road is supposed to be, you pay the toll and then it's free, but then they just keep charging you. And so like what's actually happening here, and things like this are happening on a global scale. So it's important that if we can create a technology or a worldview, we can literally shift things so fast, and it opens up. Just as another example is like the 4-minute mile. It's like, what are we capable of when we go to the moon? It's like, what are we capable of? We think bigger, we dream bigger, our possibilities become more. And another one's when I was snowboarding, a 720 or a rodeo was a huge deal. Now you look at the snowboarders today and you're doing switch, triple cork, 1440s, and it's an evolution. And ideally, collectively, we can evolve as a species to something much more magnificent, more beautiful. And I want to touch on this for sure, because, just your chapter 7 on consciousness and the human experience could be such a profound book in itself. And I'm going to read every one in there because it's important, but it's Consciousness, Hologramic Blueprint, the Human Nature Experience, Cosmometry of Being Human, the Feeling Body, Intention, Attention, Love, and Joy, Cohering the Noosphere, right?
Noosphere,
harmony.
yeah.
And so Cohering the Noosphere, I find really fascinating. I don't know if we want to start there, but why don't you tell us like of that chapter and all the amazing goodness in there? I'm blanking on his name, but he's on the podcast. Roger Nelson did work on the noosphere, and he was like, I think he's episode 88. And just talked about basically the global consciousness, and the unified feel is similar to that, in understanding that it's not just dead space, that we're interacting with something, and that something is very important. And if you look at Eastern views, they already know this. That's in all of, they're taking account for that energy. It's chi and force, like they already know this. It's thousands of years old. It's just Western thinking is just totally disregarding it. And I think that's where the shift is coming, is starting to take account to this unseen force.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Well, and so fundamentally, we're talking about consciousness now, and it's always been the most difficult topic, because first of all, there's no real agreement yet on where does that even come from. When you're looking at a physical model of the universe, where does that come from? And typically these days, it's considered in the kind of more mainstream models, an epiphenomenon of the brain. And so the brain is actually generating consciousness. And when you come to understand, like you said, there's a greater field that we're immersed in, not only physically, but of mind, of consciousness, which I firmly believe is the case. Then the body, the physical system, becomes more seen more as an antenna. The brain, the heart, the central nervous system, the solar plexus, amazing fractal network of electrical, electromagnetic communication, is seen then as an antenna in a larger field that's our physical, biological field or self, and then what's called the biofield, which is the extension beyond the physical, that is still a localized experience of ourself. It's still ourself. But there's not a distinct boundary then with the rest of the universe. There's actually a deep, intimate connection with the rest of the universe. Now, on the planetary scale, that greater field is called the noosphere, which is the thinking layer of the planet. It's the mind layer, not just of humans, but of plants and animals, and the general field of intelligence. And there are a couple of studies I cite in that chapter. One with the HeartMath Institute and their Global Coherence Initiative, which has magnetometers all around the world that are measuring the sun's the magnetic energies that are coming from the sun, the solar, the solar winds and everything that's impacting the Earth's magnetic field, and how those impacts then correlate to our human experience. And in fact, they're very strong correlations. We are directly influenced by what's called the geomagnetic and the solar activity. So how we're feeling one day could be really crappy, but it's not because we're having a bad day. It's because there's some heavy geomagnetic activity going on. And they have lots of data that correlates this very clearly. And then there's another research project from Princeton University. It's called PEAR, P-E-A-R, and they had random, and they have random number generators around the world that when there are significant global collective experiences that are highly emotional. A good example was the death of Princess Diana, that just suddenly went boom, or the towers, getting hit with the planes, boom, something happened and there was a collective experience emotionally. These random number generators would show a statistical deviation from randomness. And over 450 of these tests, they also showed that there is a direct shared experience in the noosphere. And they both basically came to the conclusion that there's one field of consciousness. We're all intimately connected and entangled in it. And it's non-local, meaning it's not more strong influence on this side of the planet than it is over here. It's equally distributed. And so from a physical perspective, we have the ionosphere, we have the geomagnetic, the magnetic field, and the geomagnetic interactions with the solar system and with all of biology, and it's all intimately interconnected. And fundamentally, there's a quote in my book from Erwin Schrödinger, who is famous for what he came up with, the wave equations in physics. And he just said, there's really only one mind. There's not a multiplicity of minds. There's only one mind. And this is from a very rigorous physicist back in the day. And so the idea of cohering the noosphere is actually, like we were talking about before, making that shift into this coherent state. And there's some cool practices that I have, and I'm sure you do too. And I'd love to hear about some of what you work with, with your Zen athlete approach, because it's mind and body integration. And like I said, I studied Aikido and I learned about the Dantian, and then I later learned that there's 3 Dantian: one in your belly, one in your higher heart, and one in the center of your head. And when you center yourself in these energy centers, an amazing coherence just comes in like that. So there's some cool practices, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about that a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first I'll give a shout out because we mentioned a few times to Thrive Foster and Kimberly Gamble, because they're very lovely people. I met them in Egypt as well, and Foster's a brick. I give him a hug, and he's like so thick. Yeah. But Aikido master as well. And it's interesting that like martial arts people who really do the practice for the practice, they learn a lot about how to navigate consciousness in this reality, because it really is about quality of consciousness. The external world is challenging for all of us, and I'm always learning. I would say with everything I've learned, I'm still angry and complain and do all that. I'm like, I don't know where I would be without this training. And it's so important. I think for me, in the practices that I've learned, is one important thing that I think that every single person should consider doing is learning how to quiet their mind. You just have to know how to do that, because you're not going to be able to catch yourself when you go into negative spirals, when you just, you're going into nonsense. Learning how to quiet your mind is so fundamental. And just the power of nature, if we want to keep it simple, I definitely have more complicated ones, but if you're not even sure, just getting out in nature, having a walk and having a practice, with your practice, you're doing music. That's a beautiful way to express. That's meditation in itself. When you're playing and you're experiencing and you're creating, that's wonderful. You are a creator here. How do you want to create? And that's why music, art, sport, martial arts is so wonderful, because you're in the music. I'm sure when you're playing your instruments or whatever you're doing, you're not thinking about your book or the stresses. Is it good? Is it bad? You're just in there. And that's such a profound thing. So I'd love to hear about, your views and some of the practices you found helpful. And then also just, like cohering the self and the noosphere. Do you believe it's possible? Because I love, at the beginning, you talked about, reality, like the patterns of nature and how they're harmonic, and how we might be able to move towards that as an individual and a collective. And one of the things that I've heard and I resonate with is like a certain amount of people come into coherence, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. Like, I don't believe in enlightenment the way I used to, but at least coherent. Like maybe you go from like non-competition, right? You shouldn't worry about me stabbing you. Like that's not on the agenda. You know what I mean? It's just, I'm not going to beat you with a club and steal your sandwiches. Like, let's just get there, humanity. It's like, it'd be fine. Let's work together. We'll build a boat or something. We'll all have fish. So, even getting to that level of coherence, I feel like it would affect the noosphere, but also individually. And I think that that's what the awakening process is the individual is being able to go into those spaces and stay in coherent states, because it's a different vibrational feeling when you go into a bar and everybody's angry, or one person, you feel it. You're like, something's off, something's going on. And that's the field. You go into a place and everybody's really happy. That's a field. You feel a different experience.
Yeah, that's what I call the feeling body right there in my book. There's a chapter called The Feeling Body for that reason, because that's actually an innate aspect of our more subtle relationship to the field. And it's interesting, the words field and feel are very similar. So yeah, you touched on a few things there, and I'll kind of circle back to the beginning where you're talking about music and that experience of playing music. And what's been very interesting for me is that I played tabla drum as well as guitars and things. And tabla comes from India. It's amazing, extremely complex drums that you have one in each hand, and very profound. And I'm just fortunate that I can even do it. It's like, thank God. I haven't actually been anywhere where I can study it, so I'm just grateful that I picked it up on my own. But as I've played tabla many, many times over these years, my mind would turn off, like you said. It would go into that quiet space. And then in the midst of playing, suddenly I would be having a revelation about more cosmic aspects, these patterns, these vibrational, the musical harmonic relationships. I'd have this insight just come popping in. And I'd quickly write it down so I wouldn't forget. And I even write about it in my book, the tabla has actually been one of my greatest teachers for that reason, because it's actually, the tabla is not separate from the universe. It is the universe. The vibratory head of a drum is the same thing as the vibratory states of an atom and everything else in the universe. And so when you have this intimate relationship with tuning it and hearing those vibratory states, and then for me, because I'm familiar with the geometry side of it, seeing kind of the geometric relationships that are at play, it opened a lot of inner doors of perception for me. And so, yeah, music is definitely one of the ways. But I agree with you. Stilling the mind is actually returning to that fundamental still point that is actually everywhere in the universe. It's the section of my book is called Starting from Zero, and it's talking about Buckminster Fuller's understanding of what's called the vector equilibrium, which is the only geometry where all of the vectors on the outside, the edges, and then the vectors going to the center are all of equal length. So it's the geometry of pure equilibrium, which is a state of silence and stillness. And so when we still our minds and our bodies, we're actually tapping into that source. It's actually the most powerful source because everything is coming from that in the universe. And that's the field of pure potential. And it's fundamental to the Sims physics as well. And so we have that capacity for tapping it. And it's through these kinds of practices where we center ourselves, we make ourselves coherent, and take that into our embodiment and into the world. For me, when I studied Aikido when I was 19, I was fortunate to study with teachers who were teaching not only the practice of the martial art, but the understanding and relationship of the ki energy and the integration of mind and body. And the very simple practice of taking your mind and putting it at what they call the 1 point down in the belly, which is in Chinese tradition called the lower dantian. And when you just drop your mind there and center yourself in that place, you become physically coherent. And it's amazing, the transformation from being knocked off balance easily to being rock solid happens like that. From being able to bend somebody's arm as opposed to then having them extend their ki energy, and no matter how strong you are, no matter how weak they are, they're now integrated in mind and body, and it's instantly coherent. And I've done this with people many, many times. It's profound what's available to us just when we center ourselves and get out of the thinking head where we're up here and we're wobbly down into like our core center and our physical being. It creates this fantastic coherence just like that. And then we have the same thing in the higher heart here, another of these dantian, the center points where we just focus our mind. What I do is I bring my awareness there, and then I radiate the ki energy like I'm like a star shining. You just radiate that, and it immediately sets up a coherent field. And then there's one more in our head, so you get all three of these going, and it empowers a coherent state in ourselves, and it helps us to be less impacted emotionally and mentally and physically by the turbulence around us, and that engenders coherence. We bring ourselves coherently into the world through these kinds of practices, and that's how we can contribute to cohering the noosphere. So it's really simple. Some of these are super simple practices. You can do it anywhere, anytime, just what I just described, and it works.
Yeah, it is simple, and it's so important. Like, when you talk about intention, attention, love, and joy, if you go into your mind and you just imagine a lemon and you bite the lemon, your mouth will water. This is an experiment I do with a lot of people that I coach, or I'll get them to imagine a shape, and then I'll make it 3D, then I'll make it holographic, and they're able to do that. But if you imagine in your mind, and sometimes I'll do this with some of the people that I'm coaching, or as a thought experiment, I'll try to think of something awful. Like, I don't want to make it too awful, but when I say the awful thing, it's usually around a pet, and I imagine like something bad happens to the pet, right? And I was like, how did you feel? And they're like, I felt terrible. Why'd you do that? And I was like, because what we put in our mind creates an emotional state. It changes the way our physiology reacts. It changes our thinking. It changes everything. So that's our intention and our attention. And so in martial arts, you need to be focused and aware. You're present. You're there. And so many people in this world today, they don't ever have a break from what I refer to as just task list consciousness, or stress consciousness, or anxiety consciousness, or just problem solving and going around, and it's on and on and on and on, and they never get a break ever. And so putting in those breaks, whether it's music, going out in nature, sports, meditation, whatever way you want to do it, you need to have those breaks. Otherwise, you're going to be run by something else, some sort of external influence, because you're not going to have enough time to think, to reflect, to choose, to intend. It's so mandatory to give yourself that time. And so it's such an important part of just understanding our own consciousness and our own coherence, no matter where you are in the world. Because if you're 15, you're at one stage. If you're at 25, you're at another stage. If you're at the peak of your career at 42 and then you have a dive, you're at a different stage. Life is very fascinating experience, and nobody really has a strong handle on it. I just had Brian Keating on the podcast. He's a brilliant physicist, and he's just like, one of the smartest physicists out there. It's like, we have no idea what's going on. As like I said all the time, it's like, we know a little bit, but like a little bit of like infinite, so how can we, increase the quality of our consciousness. So what I want to ask you, because your book, it covers so many important topics, what do you see? What do you believe are the fundamental things that need to happen to move into the next octave or into a world of peace? If we looked around and like an alien spaceship was up, or we look at ourselves 50 years back, and like we're in the caveman days, we are in the dark ages. We have people battling, there's famine, there's war. This is craziness. This is not an intelligent species being an intelligent species. I can make theories about why that's happening and go into conspiracy world 101. And we can take accountability as each individual here and do our part to create more coherence within ourselves and our community. So what would be the most important things that you would see to shift humanity towards, quote unquote, a next octave, the new earth, whatever, fifth dimension, the Hopi prophecy, whatever you want to call it, or just to peace, just to a better planet of coherence?
Peace. Yeah. That's beautifully said. I think you really encapsulated a lot of the core essence of what is needed, to make the shift, and also the impediments to it. And, I would say it's essential, to understand that the science of the unified field and the implications and applications of that understanding is very real, and it's actually been ridiculed for a long time. In science, and like, for example, Nassim and other physicists who are trying to pioneer another way of looking at it have been intensely ridiculed and limited and tried to be shut down. Thank God for their perseverance. And the beautiful thing is that with that perseverance is coming very rigorous scientific analysis of the fact that it is a superabundant unified field that we live in. And we understand the source of mass. We understand the source of gravity, and we understand the dynamics of electromagnetism and sound, and how it's creating form, and how it's creating balance and imbalance. And so it's essential, kind of at the collective level, to embrace this, to open minds and open hearts to receive the fact that this is a natural, true state of reality, not the one that we've been living by for all this time. That's been scarcity and domination and control, and all that goes with it, with the warring. And this is an old mind. It's an old thinking, and it doesn't in any way need to be perpetuated. And one thing Buckminster Fuller always said was, we don't need to fight the old systems and try to fix them. We need to create the new ones that obsolete those old ones. And that's what's happening now in really profound ways in technologies of energy generation and for restoring balance and wholeness. It's all about restoring balance and wholeness, basically. Everything we're talking about is restoring balance and wholeness in the material world, in the consciousness, in the field as a whole, as in the coherence of the field. And so there's the technological side, there's the personal side with these coherence engendering practices, very physical activity through martial arts or playing music, as well as the inner ways that we can center ourselves and not be so, pushed around by our own emotions and victim thought patterns and things like that. And just be open now to pragmatically, not just fluff idealism. When that's, again, it's in a way, there's nothing wrong with that, because we have to hold the ideal in mind. We have to be willing to go, this can be real. This peace on earth thing is not just a new age dream. It actually can be real. We have everything available to us now to make that possible, more so than in the past even 50 years. And we are accelerating, and it's essential we embrace the larger context of what the value of our technological powers are, not just to be able to create AI because it's cool, let's see who can get there first, or genetically engineer because, wow, we could mutate and do some weird shit. But but to actually use it for a higher purpose. 20 years ago, I was working with Barbara Marx Hubbard as co-director of the Foundation for Conscious Evolution, and bless her, she just passed away a couple months ago. And she coined or popularized the idea of conscious evolution, and that's what we're talking about here. Engaging fully and consciously with our intention and our attention into making this shift real. And of course, people are waking up to that and participating in that all over the world in increasing numbers, and getting the fact that this other stuff that's going on is just really a contrived drama, on TV more than it is an actual reality. So yeah, those are some of the things I would say about that.
Yeah, man. I definitely agree. And I see this world is so artificial, and it's becoming more artificial. The way that we operate, the way that we're navigating it, the things that culturally we're placing importance on, it's ridiculous. It's just unbelievably ridiculous. It is so adolescent. It's shocking. It just baffles. It's just so baffling to me. And so, I think the potential we have as humanity to experience a whole new way of existing. This could be even in your personal life. Like, that's where it starts. If you are a severe alcoholic, addicted to drugs, stressed out, doing a job that harms people, you can shift and change your whole world. Like, I use this, example a lot. And, if you are in the military, it's not a knock against you. It's just that you may have the experience where you shoot somebody or they shoot you back. There might be a great reason for either or, but that's an intense experience, right? You might have a job where your job is to kind of like hose people for all the money that you can get, or, it's just not good, And so if you switch that to something that's a little bit more enjoyable for you, something more aligned with your passions, maybe you're a military guy, or you're working I have a amazing friend of mine who worked in the slaughterhouse, and I was like, bro, like, it's not good for your consciousness. There's a lot of, again, not to say about meat, it's just that job specifically has a lot of implications for your quality of consciousness. I was like, that's where he's showing up every day. And he said it was like the wild, wild west of the workers and all this. And I was like, bro, if you shift, now he's ideally a little bit of a better job, but that changed his reality, the way that he showed up every day as an individual. We can start there. And so my question is, what do you see is possible? Let's just say there's a switch goes on. Everybody decides to stop. The craziness stops to happen. If there are forces that are really suppressing us, that eases up a little bit. And just to talk about the science moving forward too, these are old institutions that have vested interest to keep things the same and those theories the same. And it's not ideal to have these new ideas that have potential grounds. There's a lot of funding, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of history, and there's a lot of clout. Imagine you being a professor for 20 years and then that theory is now gone. You're screwed, and all those other people. So there's a huge vested interest in this. And that's what's happening, in science. If you think about taxi drivers, you create Uber, it's an upgraded system, and in Vancouver they pick it, but there are things that become obsolete with technology. There's going to be things that come obsolete within science. And the more scientists that can be open to the greatest good, using your big brain to do something good, focus there. I don't care what it is, and be okay with letting things go, because that's what we all have to do when we learn, when we grow. We have to let parts of us that we held dear die. Like, I'm so afraid to listen to my podcast if I ever do 5 years down the road, 6 months down the road. I have no idea what's going on. So I was like, oh man, I thought that. And that's just where I was at the time, through my experiences, through information, through whatever. It's just my best, man. I'm a meandering monkey experiencing something. I have no idea what's going on here. So I want to ask in a direct way, what do you see as possible if the light switch went on, we started being coherent, we moved to this next octave, like the Hopi call it the fifth world, we overcome this test? What could we potentially experience as far as consciousness and a way of life? How would you see that work? Like, the most Pollyanna perspective. No crap. There's no problem. Just build it.
Yeah, just ideal vision here. Yeah, well, I think from a consciousness perspective, we're in the process of transcending certain kinds of mental and emotional patterns that have dominated the human psyche based on the worldviews that we talked about earlier, the scarcity and then the control and the competition. And, scientifically, it's just been so put in our faces that that's what reality is, when in fact, that's not the case. And so I really feel there's a process of transcending certain emotional reactive states and certain mental thought patterns, that it's underway and it's inevitable. It's not just kind of maybe that's going to happen. I think in the evolution of a collective field of consciousness, and then in the individuals that are comprising that field, it's inevitable that this would happen. And it coincides with the evolution of the power capacity we have in our technologies. And in order to handle that power, to be able to genetically engineer, or to be able to tap the unlimited energy potential, and to be able to understand the frequency-based impacts we can have for the good or otherwise, and to handle that power requires this kind of a shift to occur. And I think it's a natural shift. It's not something that has to be willed only. It's actually, I think there's a what they call a strange attractor. There's something of a higher understanding that people around the world are getting. I call it normalizing cosmic consciousness, where it becomes, instead of some far out thing beyond reach, collectively around the world, people are getting a cosmic perspective about who we are and what is the nature of reality. And as we do so, we're sort of meeting it in our daily experience, and that means it's becoming more normalized. And that's what's going to make it possible to achieve the ideal vision of peace on this planet. And when we do, for instance, when we don't have to burn fossil fuels anymore on this planet, which is already possible and really ought to have happened, even in the past 100 years, since Tesla, came up with a way to transcend that problem. But when that happens, then the skies and the water and the earth and the plants and the biology are going to very quickly convert the extra pollutants and eliminate them from the environment. And we have ways of actually accelerating that are based on frequency. They're not based on chemical application or something like that. And so the air, the water, the soil will rapidly come back to a balanced harmonic state. And when that happens, the stressors on our experience biologically will be removed. And even the aesthetic stressors of power lines and the crap, the ugliness that's out there just to have this modern world, and especially things like the electromagnetic pollution. One of the things I write about in my book is a research from some two researchers in the Netherlands who have come up. They did a meta study of over 500 papers to determine a set of frequencies across 57 octaves, I think, of beneficial frequencies that are beneficial for biology and the ones that are detrimental. So if we applied that knowledge and that data, to when we create technologies, we use those beneficial frequencies, then our technologies become beneficial to our biology, not detrimental. And when you have a world that's free of all that pollution and free of that electromagnetic distortion and detriment, the psyche and the body and everything gets to relax, and people will actually be able to move beyond the scarcity reality that's been perpetuated into a state of comfort and safety, in a very physical way. And when that happens, people get happy, People can be in their joy rather than suffering. And we can do that now. It's not some far out ideal. It's a great ideal to hold in mind, and yet it's a practical, realizable outcome of applying these things in the ways we're talking about. So that's what I see, and it's happening, and I think it's just inevitable if we don't blow the show before we get there.
Amazing. Well, I love how you say it's inevitable, and you talk about like this principle, and I feel like it's evolution. Some might people call it God or source or whatever, but what is that pulse that takes a caterpillar and turns it into a butterfly?
Yeah,
Just to
exactly.
like say it's happening, like there's an evolution happening. Some sort of force is allowing this to happen, and I'm sure a caterpillar breaking out of its shell is not very comfortable. A lot of these big, massive changes aren't comfortable. And I think also too, we need to take responsibility as individuals, community, in a world family without distinction of race, color, age, money, status, whatever. And wherever you are in the world, no matter where you are, especially if you have influence, use that for good. Say the words peace, joy, bring it to be that example, because we need that. Now we need to take a responsibility as an individual and a community and a species to make this change happen, because maybe it does go to crap. I hope not, but it does seem like that's a very reasonable way we could go too if we don't pass this test as a collective. So I just want to thank you for coming on the show and your work, and so stoked for you to be releasing this book today.
Thanks,
I know you have a hard stop in 10 minutes, so I'll just open it up and you can share whatever you wish. But is there anything that you wish that we had talked about, or anything that you want to leave the listeners with, get in before we close it up?
I appreciate that. It's been so fun to have this conversation with you, and I love the way that you think about all this, and not only think about it, but you want to make it real. You want to bring it into yourself and into your life and in the world. And I can feel that so strongly, and I can see it in the work you're doing. And I can see you're all about engendering the empowerment and the clear mind and centered heart and the coherence in each of us, and then therefore in the field. And so I just appreciate that tremendously, Matt, for what you're bringing in as well. And I'm grateful to have this chance to talk with you, and do so on the day that I'm just launching my book. It's just on Amazon and print and Kindle versions as of today. And I'm super excited about that. It actually got #1 new release in Cosmology today, which is awesome.
Congrats.
and actually both the Kindle and the print was on #3. So I was like, wow, cool. There's I have a website at cosmometry.com where people can go and check out a little bit about what the book is about. I'm actually going to flesh out a section of the site to add for every chapter of the book, to be able to add like videos and animations of the geometries that are just sitting there as a static image in the book, to bring it all to life. So it's going to grow a lot over the time ahead. I just encourage people to really take a look more deeply into what is happening through what I'm sharing in Cosmometry, through Resonance Science Foundation, through Thrive, through what you're bringing forth, and just numerous resources around the world. And to really go into a place of trust that this stuff is real, because when we get the reflection we're getting from mainstream media and all the crap that's out there, it can be so disheartening, and it can also be really hard to be in our joy in the face of it. Like the gravity of the world situation is so intense. The mass extinction that's happening on the planet is unprecedented. I mean, it's happened in other ways before, but not from primarily human cause. So it can be very disheartening, and it's really essential that we can see the larger vision. We can feel the approaching potential to make this leap and to pass the test, and to bring ourselves into what I call the joy body, to really reside in the place where we're actually radiating our key energy. We're not contracted. We're not in fear. And we can allow that universal life force flow to come through us and share that in the world, and then find the ways that each of us can empower the realization of these new technologies, these new social systems, these new currencies, the ways that we can create that which makes the cooperation, collaboration, and coherence happen in the world. And it's happening everywhere. It's really cool to see. And just really go into a state of trust that that's what is happening, and it is inevitable. And when we each choose it, we're empowering it in the world. So those are the things I would say. I hope you're going to come to our retreat in the Redwoods this July. I'm sure you're aware of that through the Resonance Academy.
I didn't know. Man, I'm in my own world here. You got to keep me up
You
to the cool
are.
stuff.
Yeah, July right here in Santa Cruz in Scotts Valley is a beautiful retreat center called 1440. Foster and Kimberly Gamble are going to be there. Bruce Lipton and Greg Braden are going to be coming through and Zoom for a collaborative session with them in the sim. And it's going to be 5 days with, all the kinds of people we went to Egypt with, hanging out together and having resonance talks, which are going to be like little TED Talks from all sorts of people, and some great music and experiential workshops and things like that. So that's in late July, and if people want to check that out at resonancescience.org. That's the Resonance Science Foundation's website. And my website is cosmometry.com, so good places to check out what's happening.
Yeah, man. Well, Marshall, that was such a beautiful closing statement. I totally agree. And I'll just second all those thoughts, and I'll just invite everybody to check out your book, because the way that you've put it together, and I'm so excited about what you're going to bring to the future, because the images in there, the illustrations, and, if you have the ability to animate those, that's going to be absolutely spectacular. So I just want to acknowledge you for all the work and all the effort and all the intention that you hold to bring this forth, because it is a ton of work to do all that. So I recognize that, and you and I recognize the intention to, do your part to try to improve the planet, because it's important and we need that. So just thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And I invite everybody to check out your book, leave a review on Amazon when you get it, because those help support Marshall. But yeah, man, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it so much. I really enjoyed it and look forward to doing it again sometime. And come to the retreat. We'd love to have you there.
Sounds good.
Your energy is awesome.
I appreciate that, man. Well, have an amazing day, my friend, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Be well.
Okay. See you guys. Peace.
Peace.